Good evening. It is the 23rd of February, 2022. Been a cold day. Been the last couple days have been cold. I just realized I got the date wrong over here. I don't like that. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's the 23rd. All right, here we are. The 23rd of February 2022. I hope you guys have had a good week. I had a pretty interesting week as far as... Man, my camera is bugging me. Somebody help me remember at the end of all of this that I need to fix my mount thing, because there's two little prongs that are holding my camera in there, and one of them is no longer holding anything. So if the other one goes out tonight, we're going to see the floor real quick. So hopefully I can get that fixed before next week. Yeah, so help me remember about that. And then what else do we have going on? I don't have any announcements. I don't do that anyway. We had a second little, I don't know what you call it, a litter of goats. They're always, these sort of goats that I've got around here, they're always born in twins, apparently. I've got 3 sets of twins now running around my yard. And the last ones were born, I think it was Monday night, Monday afternoon. That stretched into Monday night. And they're a little bit small compared to the other set that was born here. That's the only thing I have to compare it to. So we've been trying to take better care of them so that they don't freeze to death at night, and so they eat and everything else. They've been in my house, on my couch, cuddled in blankets several times. So it's been an interesting week as far as goat stuff goes. I've also been around doing some yard work for folks, so I really like doing that. I like working in other people's yards more than I like working in my own yard. Maybe that's why I got goats, right? So, what else? Let's remember to be praying for folks. If you've got a prayer request, you can put it up there for me right now. I feel like I came across one this week that was sort of out of the Simple Truth radar, but it's slipping my mind now. I'm horrible at remembering details. So God knows, we'll just be praying for whatever that was. And I'm sure I will remember as soon as we're done. But if you've got one, feel free to just type it in, and we'll put it up there. What else do we have going on? I've got like 2 more minutes just to fill with random chatter so that we start at 6 o'clock. I'm pretty excited actually tonight. I always have a goal of hitting a certain amount of content to talk during my sermon, and I almost always go way over it, and so then I end up trying to sort of talk fast. I'm right at it tonight, so I'm hoping that means I can talk slower. I switched to decaf. You would think that would make me talk slower. So I guess I could always start earlier too, but I don't need to do that tonight. And that would kind of defeat the purpose of starting at 5 minutes before we actually start. I need some sort of like, I don't know. I've shown pictures of my kids before. Oh, I have a friend who gave me an old picture of myself, actually a packet of old pictures of myself from high school with long hair and everything. And I was going to show you guys, but I forgot it. It's in my room. I'm not getting up to go get it. Sorry, everybody. It's nothing really anybody needs to see anyway. All right, listen. We're a minute early. We're starting anyway. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to just gather around your word and submit ourselves to what you have to say to us, to ask that you would be our teacher, our leader, and that you would open up our eyes to what you have to say to us, open up our hearts to your Holy Spirit to teach us, and ask that you would give us wisdom as we look into your word and help us to apply it to our lives. And Lord, we want to lift up all the prayer requests that we talk about on Sunday mornings, those of us who are sick, who are hurting among us. I want to lift up the family of Gillet, as they're obviously still in mourning for their beloved mother or sister or aunt or whoever. Just pray that you would be their comfort, and all those other ones, the prayer requests that I can't remember, Lord, I pray that you know you're the Lord, and you would take care of those things. In Jesus' name, amen. I feel like an idiot making prayer requests like that, but like I said, God is sovereign. So here we go. We're in Joshua chapter 1. Last week we got a few verses into Joshua chapter 1, looking at how God issued his commission to Joshua. And, God had called Joshua to lead his people after the death of Moses long before we get to the book of Joshua. It was something that he knew was going to happen when Moses passed away. When they were still wandering into the desert, that was something that God told him. But when Moses actually died, when Joshua was actually taking his place, his role as the commander of God's people, God came to Joshua privately in Joshua chapter 1 to encourage him, to tell him kind of exactly how he was going to be their leader. And the key is the balance between bold action and a careful obedience to God's law. It's a balance, like I said, and that's, to me, the whole thing was added up as it results in faith. That is how Joshua was going to be a leader. He was going to follow God by faith, and he was going to lead God's people by faith. And the campaign of Israel to take the promised land is, to me, just a totally relevant example to us today, because we also need faith to inhabit our promised land, the land that we live in, the life that we live in. Just like Joshua, as God told him over and over again, we need to be strong and courageous to have the faith to follow God. So that was God's call on Joshua. And as we start now in Joshua 1, chapter 1, verse 10, we're going to see what Joshua does in response to God's commission. So verse 10. And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So, trusting in God, being obedient to what God is telling him, Joshua responded immediately with some of the bold action that we were talking about last week. And the first thing that Joshua does after he assumes command of God's people is he gave responsibility to others. He delegated. Maybe that's not necessarily what stuck out to you when we read those two verses, but I have been in sort of a supporting role in ministry for well over 20 years now. And this is actually pretty significant, the way that Josh leads the people of Israel, because a lot of leaders are afraid to delegate. A lot of leaders are afraid to give anyone else any kind of authority or responsibility. A weaker leader in Joshua's position probably would have called a general meeting of all of Israel. Hey, everybody gather. And then he would have stood up in front of them and gave this rousing speech about, hey, God spoke to me. He made me your leader. I'm going to lead you into take what's ours. And, made sure that everyone understood that Joshua was the guy in charge, made sure everyone understood that God had chosen him, everything else. But Joshua doesn't need that sort of showmanship. He isn't afraid to delegate. So he's secure in the authority that God has given him. He knows that he doesn't need to demonstrate it. He doesn't need to show it off. And so he lends his authority to the officers of his people, and they spread the word about their plan in a much more efficient and personal way. Joshua doesn't make him the center of everything that's going on. And it reminded me very much of how the apostles delegated responsibility to the deacons in the book of Acts. And Jeff just talked about this 2 or 3 Sundays ago when he was talking about the qualifications of deacons. So I don't think that we need to go over that again. But to me, when a leader delegates responsibility, especially in church setting, obviously, it's very much a recognition that it's God's work, not the leader's work, not the leader's role. And we as workers in God's kingdom are just blessed to be a part of his work. And if we try to hoard that blessing to ourselves and make sure no one else gets any part of that, it's only going to harm us. But when we share that responsibility, when we share the blessing only grows. And we realize that God has made a part for everyone to play. And that's pretty clear when you read those portions of the New Testament when it talks about the different roles in the church. We're all supposed to be working in God's kingdom. So back to the actual message that Joshua had them pass on. The message was really a declaration of Joshua's faith in what God had commanded them to do. It's a statement of faith, demonstration of faith, perhaps. He's telling the people, get ready, because we're going to go over the Jordan River, and we're going to receive the land that God has promised to give to us. Now, last week, we talked about the kind of things that Joshua had seen with his own eyes, that he had personally witnessed when he was one of those 12 spies who went into Canaan way back in the book of Numbers. And he saw that there was giants in the land. He saw that there was fortified cities. The spies talked about how, it's a land that devours its inhabitants. It's dangerous, and they talked about the giants and said, hey, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And, this wasn't any less true now as Joshua is talking in Joshua chapter 1 as it was 40 years before that. It's still true. Doesn't matter, because God told Joshua to lead the people of Israel into the promised land, and God is going to give it to them. And so that's what Joshua was going to do. Hey, it's time to go. We're going. And then think about the aspect of, hey, we're going to cross the Jordan River. The Jordan River, as we're going to see in a couple chapters, takes a little bit to get there. We're going to see that it's actually in a state of flooding at this point. In Joshua chapter 3, verse 15, it describes it. It says, where is it? Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So it's not just that it's full, but it's full and it's overflowing the banks, and it spreads out. It gets much wider than it was before. So think about Israel, the nomadic tribe of shepherds and herdsmen who have spent the last 40 years wandering around in the desert. They obviously had some few boats, because in chapter 2 they're going to send 2 spies into the land, but they don't have any sort of infrastructure or plan or means of getting the whole nation across this flooded river. 1 million or more people, perhaps. Again, doesn't matter. God told Joshua, you're going to take the people of Israel across the Jordan River. And so Joshua says, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to obey. I'm really excited to get to the portion of the story where we talk about them crossing the Jordan River. It's one of my favorite stories of the Bible. But it's interesting to think about this sort of 3-day warning that Joshua is giving to the nation of Israel, because it's this countdown. You have 3 days, and everything you know is going to be different after those 3 days. Think about there's some old women, there's some old men in the children of Israel who were born in Egypt. They were born as slaves. Everyone else was born in the desert. Everyone else was born as they just wandered aimlessly around from one place to another for the last 40 years. That was all they knew. And I mean, they even, at this point in Joshua chapter 1, they're still eating the manna that falls from heaven. They walk outside of the camp every single day, and there's a food source that God miraculously provides for them every day. That was what they were used to. After they cross the Jordan River, after they begin this invasion, everything is going to change. They're not going to be nomads any longer. They're going to live in cities. They're going to have orchards and farms. They're going to eat from the produce of the land. God's not going to provide manna for them anymore. And they're going to be at war. And so Joshua sends out this message, hey, in 3 days, we're going. Get ready. You better pack a lunch, because we're going, and we're going to receive what God is giving to us. Verse 12. Wrong page. And the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of and to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers, and shall help them, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers, as he has to you. And they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession, and you shall possess it, the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. So this is another sort of slightly more difficult conversation that Joshua needed to have with some of the tribe of Israel before they crossed over. He delegated the more simple, straightforward, and kind of personal message of, hey, get ready, pack your stuff, pack a lunch, because we're going to cross the river. But this conversation that he has with the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh is more complicated. And so he takes that on as a leader. He takes it on himself. And if you don't know the story, this part of Joshua chapter 1 probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why is that more complicated? What is he talking about? But there's actually a really interesting bit of history that goes into this conversation that Joshua is having. So go back to the book of Numbers, verse 30, or chapter 32, and in verse 1 it says this: Now the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had a very great number of livestock, and they saw that the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came and said to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and the chiefs of the congregation, Atrioth, Dibon, Gazer, Nimrath, Heshbon, Eliah, Sebam, Nebo, and Baran, the land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. And they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. Now, last week we talked about the battle that Joshua led as Israel fought the Amalekites. So, sorry, that was where Moses was standing on the hill and his servants were holding up his arms. But that was not the only battle that Israel fought before they crossed over into the Promised Land. In Numbers chapter 21, Israel sends out these messengers to the land of the nation of the Ammonites, which is different than the Amalekites. The Ammonites. And they were asking for permission to pass through the land. They said, listen, we're going to stay on the highway. We're not going to get off the road. We're going to just walk through. We're not going to eat anything that we see in your fields. We're not going to even drink water from the wells. We just want to go through your land, and you won't even hear from us. But the Ammonite king, whose name was Sihon, he refused. And then he led his army out to actually attack Israel rather than let them pass peacefully through. He thought, hey, you know what? No, I'm going to take your stuff. And so then Israel fought them, wiped them out. And then the neighboring nation of Bashan, they decided, hey, we want to crack at that. And so their king Og led out his army against Israel. Same thing happened. Israel wiped them out. And so then suddenly there's these two nations worth of land that is unoccupied. And as the years go by, they're still wandering around, and there's this two tribes of Israel, Reuben and Gad, and they think, hey, listen, this is pasture land. That looks nice to us. We have a lot of animals that need pasture land. Why don't we instead just stay here? It seems like a good match. And so they went to Moses and asked him, hey, how about we stay here? Instead of leading us over the Jordan, can we just have this as the land that God would give us? Now, to me, it seems like the biggest problem with this situation, this suggestion that they have, is that they're sort of picking their own promised land, rather than waiting for the actual promised land that God had prepared for them, right, or promised to give to them. It seems ungrateful to me, or unfaithful. They're not willing to wait. So God had this plan to bring all 12 tribes of Israel into Canaan, and rather than waiting for that actual land, they are sort of asking to change God's plan, the two tribes of Reuben and Gad. And then by the end of Numbers 32, another half tribe of Manasseh wants to join them. And to me, it looks like sort of an open shut case of choosing something that's good rather than waiting for something that is the best. Or maybe you could say it's a case of making a decision based on human wisdom, or the wisdom that we see in the flesh, or we have in the flesh, rather than trusting in God. But it's interesting that nowhere ever in the Bible is this suggestion condemned for that reason. Moses is actually pretty angry with them for this request, but it's for a completely different reason. In verse 6, Numbers 32, it says, "But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into this land that the Lord has given them?" Now, Moses goes on for quite a while in Numbers chapter 32, reading them the riot act about how they were going to discourage God's children from going into the promised land. He reminds them of the 10 spies who discouraged Israel from entering the promised land, and the consequences of their 40 years in the desert because of that. And it makes complete sense. Why would the other 10 tribes, why should they be expected to go and fight for the land, while Reuben and Gad just get to sort of sit back behind and enjoy the land that has already been conquered by the whole rest of Israel? Doesn't make sense, and it would be discouraging if you were some of the other tribes. But Reuben and Gad came up with their own solution. In Numbers 32, verse 16, it says, "Then they came near to him and said, 'We will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones, but we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east.'" So their suggestion is they volunteer basically to be the frontline troops of the invasion of Canaan. They said, we're going to leave our families behind, we're going to build cities, we're going to build pasture land for our livestock, we're going to leave them all behind, trusting God to take care of it, their wives and children, by the way, and we're going to go in front of our brothers and go and help them fight to take their land as well. And Moses liked that plan. Verse 20. "So Moses said to them, 'If you will do this, if you will take up arms to go before the Lord for the war, and every armed man of you shall pass over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies from before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Build cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep, and do what you have promised. It's actually pretty interesting to me that that's the context of that promise that people say so often. Be sure that your sin will find you out. But they aren't condemned, they're not punished at all for looking around, seeing something that's good, and asking for it. Hey, God, I like this land. Can I have it? It's actually quite the opposite, because in fact, God, after hearing this request, after hearing this prayer, more or less, God adjusted the terms of the promises that he had made to Israel. Previously, he had prepared the land of Canaan for Israel. That was the borders, and it's pretty well described. The land edges that was going to be for the children of Israel. But after this request, God enlarged those borders. And in Joshua's conversation with these tribes back in Joshua chapter 1, he talks about the land of Gilead, which was on the eastern side of the Jordan River where they were talking about. He describes it as the land that God provided for them, or he talks about it as the land that God was giving to them, included in the rest of the land that the rest of Israel was going to inherit inside Canaan. So that's interesting. They prayed, God adjusted what he had promised, and they were getting more land now. Interesting. However, I want to point out that even though they weren't punished for this, that doesn't mean that there were not consequences to this arrangement. Reuben and Gad, and eventually the half-tribe of Manasseh, they were going to live in Gilead on the opposite side of the Jordan River from the whole rest of Israel. And eventually that would include the temple grounds and the altar where they were expected to go and worship God and offer sacrifices. And as we're going to see when we get to Joshua chapter 3, crossing the Jordan River was not always just a casual arrangement. It was a major undertaking sometimes of the year. And in the years to come, there was going to be this physical barrier between these 2.5 tribes and not only their brethren, but also the place where they could physically go and worship God. There's going to be a physical barrier. And there's also going to be, later on, towards the end of Joshua, there's going to be a misunderstanding between these 2.5 tribes and the other, 9.5 tribes. And it almost caused a civil war because of a simple misunderstanding, because of the physical distance and the barrier between them. And none of that would have been an issue if they hadn't looked outside of the land that God had promised them and said, hey, well, how about this? Can we have this also? Or have this instead of the land that you promised us? And just as another side note, if the 12 spies that had gone into Israel the first time had brought back a good report, and Israel had gone into the land and conquered Canaan, then these 2.5 tribes would never have even had the chance to look in outside of the borders of God's kingdom. So there's consequences to our actions. I won't even say there's consequences to our sins, because I don't think this was a sin, but there's consequences to the choices that we make. Sometimes it's sin, or sometimes it's just a choice that we make. And, God allows us to choose good sometimes when we could have had the best instead. There's a lot of things that aren't sin, but it's not necessarily the best thing for us. Maybe the choices that we make are going to put up obstacles between us and walking in faith. Sometimes we can overcome those obstacles, but it would just be easier if we didn't have to, because of the consequences of our choices. God has given us the power of choice, but he gives us brains, and he wants us to make good choices. And we need to make sure that we're not making the mistake of thinking that just because God gives us choices, that doesn't mean that every choice that we're going to make is equally good, or that God is going to bless everything that we do equally. There's consequences to our choices. Back to Joshua chapter 1, verse 16. And they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So after Joshua reminds these 2.5 tribes of the promises that they've made and what would be required to them, they answer and say, hey, listen, we're going to do it. We're not hesitating. We have no second guessing about the decision that we've made. We're going to fulfill the things that we promised. And they're all in, right? And they even give Joshua this little extra bump of encouragement. Hey, we're behind you, Joshua. Just like we were behind Moses, we're behind you. We're going to do what you say. We're going to go where you send us. We're going to fulfill the promises that we made. And I don't know if they heard about God's commission to Joshua that we studied last week, or if maybe some people actually physically heard God talking to Joshua, or if God just sort of put his words in their mouths as they're talking to Joshua to give him another extra sort of reminder, an extra bump of encouragement, because they use the same words that God used. They tell him only be strong and courageous, which is what God told Joshua 3 times in the first 10 verses of Joshua. And it's just an extra little reminder that it's faith that's going to win their battles when they enter the promised land. It's not going to be based on his military might or their superior weapons or tactics or anything else. The only way that they're going to win the battle to take the land that God promised them is to rely on God to do it for them. It's going to be faith that brings them into the promised land, which is like the promised land that we inherit. God has not promised us, a physical place that we're going to go and fight and take from our neighbors, but he has promised us a life of being used by him, of spreading his word, of spiritual blessings, despite whatever sort of physical circumstances we encounter. Sometimes we're going to have ease and prosperity, and sometimes we're going to have suffering. But either way, we're always going to be spiritually blessed. And the way that we lay hold of that, the way that we are going to make that a reality of our lives is through faith. The same way that Joshua and Israel had to have faith in God to inherit the promised land. So that's Joshua chapter 1. We are making our slow way through the book. I don't really feel any need to rush, so we'll probably keep up the same pace. But that's 1. So let's pray, and then next week we'll get to chapter 2. Lord, I want to thank you for this example of your people following you, your people trusting you in you, your people laying their lives in your hands and trusting you to do good with them. Lord, as we heard tonight of the power of prayer, the power of asking and receiving from you by faith, Lord, I pray that you would help us also to ask with faith when we see something, when we have a request to make to you, Lord, that we would come to you and be humble, come to you and present those requests with a light grip, knowing that it's your sovereign choice to give us our requests or deny them, but that either way we always have you. Whether we get the thing that we're asking for, we cannot be separated from you or from your love. So, Lord, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for the goodness that you have brought about in our lives. Lord, we ask that you would help us to continue to follow you, continue to grow in righteousness and in love, and that we would spread that around to the people around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great week. Stay warm, and God bless you.